First of all, thank you for inviting me again to American University. Last time we spoke on the brain drain. Now we're going to talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is going to enhance the brain drain if we don't deal with it. Basically, we are talking about a situation that is untenable. So just a few words of background. I'm an economist. I'm a macroeconomist at Tel Aviv University. I specialize in economic growth, analysis of long-run trends. And this is basically the perspective that I'm looking at everything that I'm going to show you here. I head the Shoresh Institution for Socioeconomic Research. Professor Eyal Kimchi from the Hebrew University, also an economist, and I from Tel Aviv University, came to the conclusion we're losing the country between our fingers and we need to focus on the things that will basically keep Israel around for our children and grandchildren in several decades. Because right now we're on a trajectory that's unsustainable, and it has much to do, not just with what I'm going to show you today, but it has quite a bit to do with it. We are an evidence base. We do the research. We assume that A influences B. We test it, but we publish whatever comes out. We take the academic approach, basically, of showing everything. So in view of that, let me show you everything. We have a new government. The Likud, basically, to avoid the possibility of going to prison, the criminal defendant heading the Likud basically was left with no political alternative but to lead his country or his party in a coalition with these 5 parties. United Torah Judaism, Shas, those are the 2 Haredi parties, and 3 other parties which actually ran on one list and then split it apart into 3 parties. These are the individuals heading these parties. So I want to show you a little bit about the relationship with the law. Well, the prime minister is on trial for corruption. The head of Shas was twice convicted for corruption. He sat in jail. The head of Jewish Power, Itamar Ben-Gvir, repeatedly convicted and for incitement to racism. So where's the best place to put a convicted criminal? The head of the police. He's the minister of the police. Bezalel Smotrich, he was arrested, not tried because the Shin Bet didn't want to reveal sources, for being part of a Jewish terror cell that wanted to blow up cars on Ayalon freeway. Let's talk about the relationship of these parties to society in Israel. The 2 Haredi parties basically insist that Haredim be deprived of a basic education. In other words, in other countries, you have to teach a core curriculum. It can differ from country to country, from area to area, but that is a basic right of children to receive an opportunity for the future. They deprive their children, primarily the boys, of a core curriculum. They get a partial core curriculum until 8th grade, nothing at all afterwards. They demand to be exempt from compulsory military service. And the women basically are deprived of any representation in their parties. So when we talk about this group that's growing and we need to cater to them and help them out, basically what we're saying is, okay, and women who have made any progress, you can't teach them because they're men. You have to sit in the back of the buses when you board their buses and so on and so on. So that's these parties. Let's talk about the other guys. Bezalel Smotrich, this is pre-government when he said we should wipe out Hawara, but these guys are basically racist. There's no other way to put it, okay? In other words, we have one party that is headed by someone who's on trial for corruption. No one would touch him with a stick, basically, except for these guys. 2 Haredi parties and 3 racist parties, Jewish supremacist parties. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you the fertility rates of these parties. And the problem is that these 5 parties have higher fertility rates than any other population group in Israel. So consequently, what we received now was something beneficial in the sense that we received a 5-alarm warning. This is what the future is going to look like when these guys won't need a criminal or someone on trial for corruption to head the government. They will have enough votes of their own basically to create a government in several decades. So this is the warning that we received. What do we do about it? But also, who's voting for these guys? Okay? So the conventional way of looking at political parties is to look at voter turnout. What percentage go out and vote? What I want to show you is the reverse. How many votes did parties get relative to their entire population that's 18 and above? Okay? Haredim, the number of votes that the two Haredi parties got is 38% more than the entire adult Haredi population in Israel. So they have like a factor here that basically enhances their power even more because other people are voting for them. Religious Jews, the three religious supremacist parties, they receive 94% of the entire population of religious Jews in Israel. Obviously, not all of the religious Jews voted for him. That has to be clear, and probably not all of the Haredi, not probably, I'm sure that not all of the Haredi Jews voted for the Haredi parties. However, these statistics are no less than astounding as far as I'm concerned about how these groups identify with the parties that are basically representing something which represents the end of a liberal democracy in Israel. Now, what they do, what these guys did was, in addition to the regular budget, where we already allocate money for Haredi purposes, for settlement purposes, and so on, they went and splurged, okay? They spent just on coalition money, which is usually 1 billion shekels, 2 billion shekels, 14 billion shekels, for specific needs of Haredim and settlers. Now, that doesn't tell you very much, right? So how much does Israel spend just on higher education? All of the universities in Israel is less than that coalition money, okay? That's our national priorities. Everything that we spend on hospitals in 1 year is less than that coalition. You could fund Rambam Hospital for 10 years. You can fund the Technion for 14 years with the money that we just now are spending on extracurricular things. These are the budgetary allocations. Now, keep in mind that this is just a part of the issue. What they're doing is creating tremendous short-term damage, which is minor compared to the long-term damage. Let me give you an example of the short-term damage. Stock markets in Israel until November 1st basically moved with the US stock market, with stock markets in the G7 countries, the leading developed world countries. They moved pretty much together, so the gap between them was fairly around zero. But if you put $1 in, say, the S&P 500 or another market abroad or in Israel, this is what would happen to your earnings if you put it here versus in Israel. In other words, the markets in these other countries abroad went up while ours went down, okay? That's just short term of people seeing where we're headed, understanding the implication, pulling their money out. When you pull the money out and you're not investing, then it creates a demand for dollars, for foreign currency. It weakens the shekel. We know how to estimate what the shekel should be according to all kinds of economic determinants. This was done by 3 economists at Tel Aviv University and Hebrew University. And you can see that the estimation works really well until January 1st or 2nd, when they announced, 4th actually, when they announced the judicial coup. And then basically our shekel basically devalued in a huge, huge way. Now, when the shekel devalues, it means that import prices become more expensive. It raises prices of other things in Israel, which already has high prices. So that's just feeding in. What I just showed you is minor details compared to the long-term damage with what these guys are doing, okay? In the sense of they are basically keeping in force schools that, well, let me show you what the schools do, all right? The average level of education in Israel, in the core subjects, the things that we need to work in a modern economy, math, science, and reading. This is the most recent PISA exam. These are all the 25 developed world countries. Israel is at the bottom. This is how we prepare our kids for the future. This is how they prepare their kids for the future. And keep in mind, most of the Haredi, most of the ultra-Orthodox, they don't even study the material. They don't take the exam. This is not because of them, okay? Had they taken the exam, it would be worse. Our entire education system is in the pits. And instead of dealing with the core issues, this is what we've done, okay? Now, we don't really know what the level of education is in core subjects in Haredi schools. We do have an interesting study that was done several years ago by the Bank of Israel, which looked at towns and communities where Shas came in the 90s and put in their schools, Haredi schools, and they could even see within families some siblings that had gone to schools prior to the introduction of the Haredi schools, and then what happened afterwards to their brothers that basically went to the Haredi schools. There was an increase in dropouts by 10%. Bagut or matriculation, that fell by 15%. Employment rates of brothers, okay? Those who went to Haredi schools, 14% below. Annual gross wages. Gilad was talking about wages. If you don't know the material, who's going to hire you? And if they hire you, what are they going to hire you for and how much are they going to pay you, okay? This is the effect. That's one education stream. Two other Jewish ones are the non-religious, the Mamlachti and the Mamlachti Dati, religious schools. The Mamlachti, the non-religious, are no more than okay. Above the majority of countries, but nothing to write home about. The religious schools in Israel are terrible. They're below 80% of the developed world countries, below 20 of these 25 countries. And when we talk about the kind of education we give our Arab citizens in Israel, it's below many third world countries. In fact, if we compare Arab speakers in Israel to the 10 predominantly Muslim countries that participated in this exam, our kids, our Arab children, are below 9 of the 10 Arab countries. So this is what we've been doing in the meantime, instead of fixing things, catering to other things. Now, what's the importance of getting a core education? The politicians say, they study Gemara, they study more than we study, which is true, they study more than my students or I ever studied, but they cannot make it up in a year like they say. Now, on the face of it, we take whatever evidence we have and we fit it to the narrative, okay? So we see a lot more Haredi students going to higher education, okay? But that's primarily women. Second, it's not a big deal to look at the total number when the entire population is growing, okay? It has to be relative to size. But most important, one of the studies by one of my teachers once upon a time at the University of Chicago, Jim Heckman, Nobel laureate, one of the things that he showed very convincingly is the importance of reaching children at an early age and teaching them what they need. It doesn't matter if you're Haredi, not Haredi, Jewish, not Jewish. You need to reach children at an early age. That's when it has the biggest effect on their life afterwards. So the fact that they wake up, some of them, not even most, okay, a very small fraction, wake up and want to go to higher education, that's irrelevant. What matters is, what is the share that actually finish? Their dropout rates are outrageous. So the share that finishes relative to prime working age, as a benchmark, this is what it looks like for secular Jews, high and rising more for women than for men, similar to other developed countries. This is what it looks like for Haredim. Nothing is happening here. Possibly for women in the past 2 years, there's an increase, but the fluctuations in the past, be careful with that. But in any event, for the men, absolutely nothing. For 2 decades, if you don't have the knowledge, you cannot overcome it unless you're really, really smart, okay? That's facts of life. Now, take this one step further. When we look at employment over time, 35 to 54 years old, once upon a time, Israel was a relatively less developed nation. It wasn't a developed country where people that weren't educated with just 0 to 4 years of education, this is men, prime working age men, they could find jobs. A quarter of the men in Israel fit that category, never made it to 5th grade. Since then, we don't have many men that never made it to 5th grade, so the supply dropped precipitously. But who hires such people? The demand for them just wiped out. So the employment fell. When we cut welfare benefits, it rose recently. And in general, I'm not going to go into the whole story here, this is how economies grow. We need more educated people, they have no problem finding jobs. It may not be the job that they want, but they can find jobs. The lower the level of education, the more difficult it is to find jobs. So where do the Haredim fit? They're actually, the Haredim men are 16 plus, but it's not what we're talking about when we talk about 16 plus years of education. Two things here. One is that contrary to conventional wisdom in Israel that Haredim men never worked, they worked. In the late 70s, before they were inundated with welfare and before the economy became such that it needed people with higher education, over 80% of Haredi men worked. So the second question is, who are they most similar to over time? And here's the problem. It also increased when welfare benefits were cut and leveled off. But in general, this group nearly evaporated. This group is growing at a rate that I will show you in just a moment. But basically, it's doubling its share in the population every 25 years. And that's where we're headed. There is also a feeling in Israel that many people are switching. If you grew up Haredi, maybe you're leaving, so maybe things will turn out a different way, or maybe if you're secular, you're becoming more religious. Where are we headed? So this is from the Central Bureau of Statistics. They ask people to define themselves, Haredi, Jewish, I'm talking about Haredi, religious, traditional, secular, and also what were they at age of 15 so that we can see retention rates. So Haredim have the least leakage, least amount of people leave the Haredi community. 89% of those who grew up Haredim remain Haredim. A few become less Haredim. The other group with a very high retention rate are the secular Jews, not as high as Haredim. And then you have a few that are becoming more religious. The group that is really relatively unsuccessful in retaining are the traditional Masorti Jews. About 2/3 of them remain, with nearly a quarter becoming less religious, few becoming more religious. And actually the group that's least able to retain are the religious Jews. Only about half remain religious. Nearly a third become traditional, and nearly a tenth become secular. So on the face of it, if you put Haredim aside, we're becoming less and less religious, right? Not so fast. This is how you can deceive people with data, okay? First of all, are retention rates changing over time? Not really, okay, especially for the groups at the top here. They've been constant for a long time. Second, these guys join them. These guys join those guys, and these guys join the Haredim, and vice versa, okay? What happens when we add all of those who left one group and joined another group? What is the total number relative to the number of Haredim or Masortim and others at 15? You can see the Haredi group actually rose by 18%. Secular rose by 8%. These guys lost a lot, gained a lot. It's a wash. The religious lost a lot, and I'm still deceiving you because I'm leaving out the most important part. Fertility, okay? This is what fertility rates look like. The Haredim could afford to lose 30%, 40%, and still it would just change the rate of the velocity of where we're headed, but we're still going to reach the same place. Okay, so this is the issue here. When we look at all of the population groups in Israel, fertility rates, including non-Jews, this is what it looked like 40 years ago. In general, fertility rates are either relatively constant or declining. They increased a bit for secular Jews, but they rose to roughly where they were 40 years ago. They increased for religious Jews, again, close to what they were in the past. But in general, secular Jews, Christian Arabs, and Druze have roughly 2 children per family. Traditional Jews, about 2.5. With the Muslims in the past 2 decades, as they have a growing middle class, they want to give their children an education, a better education, less children. So that's falling towards 3. Who's not in the picture yet? Haredim. Haredim were essentially not in any government in a significant manner until 1977. Since then, they've become the kingmakers in pretty much every government. And that comes at a price. Stay out of our schools and shovel the money in our direction and keep us out of the draft. This is what happens when the money starts to flow, okay? Basically in 1 decade, the 1980s, the Haredim added a full child to the family. And then they went up above 7 children per family. Then we had the Intifada and major recession. The government had to cut funding in general, but also welfare benefits that immediately impacted fertility. And then, since the money began flowing again, fertility is leveled off. So we are basically talking now at about 6.6 children per family, which means, given everything I just showed you, the share of Haredim in every generation, every 25 years, is doubling. So if we look at all those who were born up until 1925, Haredim represent 1.5% of that population group. When we go to 70-year-olds, they're already up to 3%. 50-year-olds, 6%. So that we don't see many Haredim, adult Haredim. They're not that many. But look what happens when you go to 20-year-olds, 14%. Infants and toddlers, it's nearly a quarter. In other words, in just 25 years, half the infants in Israel are going to be Haredim. What are they going to study? Who's going to support them? Where are they going to work? Who's going to defend them? Who's going to be the physicians? Which brings us to another issue, okay? These are estimates of the Central Bureau of Statistics 40 years down the road of the share of children 0 to 14 years old, okay? In 40 years, roughly 40 years, half the children will be Haredim. This will not happen. I can categorically state this will not happen. What will happen, I have no idea. I can give you two alternative scenarios. One is we basically improve all of Israel's education system because it's horrible. On the way, we don't leave anybody aside. We include the Haredim, the Arabs, everybody else, which also means that affects fertility rates in general. So whoever will be here, whether it be Haredim or whatever, they'll at least be able to support a first world economy, because otherwise those who live here won't be able to. That's what I just told you now is not on anybody's radar. The other scenario is the default scenario. Keep our heads in the sand, ignore everything. And that means good luck keeping these guys in Israel. Those who can won't be here, there in Israel. Which brings us to one last issue, the population density, which everybody ignores. We're the third most condensed country in the OECD. I'm going to do this really fast because Michael is telling me to shut up and finish. Fertility rates in Israel are like off the charts compared to other OECD countries, which means that in just 9 years, we'll be the most condensed country in the dense country in the OECD, most congested. But why stop there when you're on a roll, right? So where does this take us? If we take UN estimates of population growth in all of the OECD countries, congestion won't change by much in most of these countries. And then there's us. We are literally leaving behind the developed world, okay? We're just shooting out. In 9 years, we're out of the developed world and heading into the stratosphere. Who's there to greet us? If we take all of the countries in the world and look at, again, UN projections, we're going to be the 10 most congested countries in 42 years. Look at our new friends, okay? These are the people that we're striving to be most similar to right now, unless we get our act together and fix it. Which brings me to the bottom line, which I have to mention here because I think it's fixable. Despite everything I just said, the key to stopping everything I just showed you, it lies within two policy realms that, again, no Israeli leader to date has actually been willing to touch. But we have had now protests at a magnitude that we've never seen, and I'm not sure that any democratic country has seen. We have, for 9 months now, we have days in which over 200,000 people go out in the streets on one night. In American terms, that's 6.5 million people on one night, and doing this continuously for 9 months to defend democracy. People have come out of their comfort zones. People are now in a whole different place. And the question is, can we harness that basically to make some major changes? So what I'm going to show you here, what are the things that I think need to be done? Again, it's on nobody's radar right now. And one of my goals right now is to convince the political leaders, the leaders of the social movement, the protests, basically to provide a vision. Because many Israelis today are thinking about leaving. Because they see this tidal wave approaching and say, even if we win right now and we stop this crazy government, next year, this tidal wave will just sweep away everything anyways in several decades. So why remain? And so if they leave, We basically have all of high tech, all the physicians, and all the senior faculty in universities, 400,000 people, 420,000 people in a country of 10 million. That's 4%. You only need several tens of thousands of these guys to get up and leave, maybe just a few thousand. We may win the war, but we'll end up losing the battle if we don't provide them a vision tomorrow morning that there is a future for Israel. That's what's on the line right now, okay? So the first goal is to move Israel to society. I'm really going to finish it in a second. The second one is to safeguard the changes, okay? In terms of moving Israel to a sustainable trajectory, two major items here. One is completely overhauling our really crummy education system. This isn't geared against the Haredim. It's not geared against not geared against anybody. It's doing the right thing in any event. But that also has an effect on fertility. It also has an effect on what kind of people come out of the other end of this education system. They'll have the tools to work. They'll understand what a liberal democracy looks like, what it needs for surviving, and also changing the entire benefit system. We have no clue, no transparency at all. Who's getting the money, how much money they're getting. You just saw a total of 14 billion going to coalition funds, but in general, you take the budget, you cannot break it up and know exactly how much we're paying to different people. That needs to be changed. We have to stop subsidizing lifestyles of non-work. We have to stop subsidizing schools that don't teach what the children need. But, and that's why the second goal here, what happens if we actually have a government that brings together right-wing and left-wing and religious and secular and Arabs and Jews like the previous one, even with wider margins as the polls suggest today, and they are willing to do this and they are able to do this, what prevents the government afterwards from changing the whole thing, okay? So that's this part. We need electoral reform. We need cabinet ministers that actually understand something in the areas that they are responsible for. A system of checks and balances that they understand why it's necessary, but also the one that exists between the branches of government. And we need a constitution to set this thing in stone. So all of these two things in and of themselves are necessary, but they'll only buy us 2 or 3 decades before the demography basically can overchange everything. This buys us time to do that. If we don't do this and just do this, it's over. So basically, all this stuff is on the website, the Showish website. You're welcome to look for it there. Thank you very much.